Imagine a woman admired by millions, a CEO at the top of the world, yet trapped in silence behind the glass of her empire. She has everything money can buy, except the one thing she craves most, the chance to stand and walk again. But when her path collides with a humble man in a crowded street market, her life takes a turn that no fortune or power could ever predict. If you are new to the channel, then please subscribe to the channel and like the video, and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Now let's jump into the story. A city where glass towers scrape the clouds, where fortunes are made with the flick of a pen, and where power is measured in headlines. High above the noise of traffic and voices, behind walls of steel and light, sat Lena Vargas. She was only 32 years old, yet already the CEO of one of the largest technology companies in the world. The press called her brilliant. The markets called her unstoppable, and the people called her untouchable. But behind the polished interviews and flashing cameras, there was a truth she kept hidden. Lena lived her life from a wheelchair, a reality born from a terrible car accident 5 years earlier. That single night had broken her spine, ending her dreams of walking freely again. She had traded dancing at parties and strolling along the beach for endless boardrooms and long hours in her high-rise office. Every evening, when the city lights flickered alive below her, Lena would gaze out of the 72nd floor window. To the world, she seemed powerful, a woman who had it all. But in her silence, she confessed something very different. She would give away every dollar, every building, every deal, just to stand on her own 2 feet again. Her company was her kingdom, but her heart felt like a prison. Success came with applause, but applause cannot chase away loneliness. After the meetings ended and the screens went dark, she returned to her penthouse, where the only sound was the echo of her own thoughts. Nights grew long, and in that quiet, she often wept, not because she lacked wealth, but because she longed for the simple things others took for granted. Walking in the park, climbing stairs, running towards someone she loved. Still, Lena carried on. She wore her title like armor, and the world believed in the image she projected. Headlines praised her for saving her late father's failing company, for turning it into a global empire. They called her the Iron Lady, a title meant to honor her strength. But secretly, she hated it. Iron was cold, heavy, and unfeeling. It was everything she was forced to be, but not who she wanted to be. Then came a morning that began like any other, but would change the rhythm of her life. Lena's sleek car moved through the city, heading toward another day of endless meetings. But halfway through the route, the car stalled in the middle of a crowded street market. Horns blared, voices rose, and her driver stepped out in frustration to check the engine. From the tinted glass of her car, Lena looked out. For the first time in years, her eyes were drawn away from the skyline and into the streets. Vendors called out prices. Children laughed and ran between stalls. The air smelled of spices, fresh bread, and life that was raw and real. Then her gaze landed on a small wooden stall at the edge of the chaos. It was fragile, held together by nails and weathered boards. Stacked on top were crates of eggs, balanced carefully as if they might topple with one wrong step. Behind the stall stood a man whose hands looked rough from work, whose skin told the story of many long days under the sun. But it was not his poverty that caught Lena's attention. It was his eyes. Calm, steady, and filled with something she had not seen in years. Kindness without condition. He noticed her looking and offered a gentle smile. For a moment, it felt like the noise around her faded. Lena was not used to such moments. In her world, people always wanted something from her. Favors, contracts, power. Here, in the middle of a broken car in a noisy market, she felt seen not as a CEO, not as a billionaire, but simply as a woman sitting in a chair. Her driver slammed the hood in frustration, muttering about calling a mechanic. but Lena's attention stayed on the man with the egg crates. There was something about him that pulled at her curiosity, something that hinted her story was about to take an unexpected turn. That day, in the most ordinary of places, the silent empire of Lena Vargas began to tremble. Not because of falling stock prices or hostile takeovers, but because of a chance encounter waiting just a few steps away. And though she could not know it yet, this meeting would change the shape of her life forever. The stall looked fragile, as though one strong wind could bring it down, but the man behind it stood steady. His name was Rafael Mendez. His clothes were plain, his shoes worn thin, yet he carried himself with quiet dignity. Every morning before sunrise, he pushed his wooden cart into the market and stacked the crates of eggs he had gathered from nearby farms. It was not much, but it was enough to keep food on the table for himself and his daughter, Alma. Rafael was no stranger to hardship. Years ago, he had served as a medic during long and brutal deployments. He had seen pain up close, had stitched wounds in the middle of fire and dust, had carried fellow soldiers to safety while risking his own life. The war left scars on his body and heavier ones on his heart. When his wife passed away from illness soon after, he found himself raising Alma alone. To survive, he worked 2 jobs, selling eggs by day and cleaning office buildings at night. Yet through all of it, he never lost the gentle calm in his eyes. That morning, when Lena's car broke down near the market, he noticed her. A woman with sharp features, dressed in elegance, sitting silently inside a vehicle that looked out of place among the crowded stalls. He walked over, not with hesitation, but with kindness, carrying a carton of eggs in his rough hands. "Ma'am," he said softly, "you look like you haven't had breakfast. Here, take this, no charge." Lena blinked in surprise. No one offered her anything freely. Her life had been filled with calculated gestures, deals, and hidden motives. Yet here was a stranger, offering food not as a transaction, but as a gift. She took the carton carefully, her eyes meeting his for a long moment. From that day forward, Lena found herself returning to the market more often. At first, she told herself it was only to buy eggs, but deep inside, she knew it was more than that. She wanted to understand the man who carried burdens so quietly, the man whose hands were rough from labor, yet moved with such gentleness. Rafael welcomed her visits with the same warm smile each time. He would wipe his hands on a cloth and tell her about the morning rush, about how Alma liked to paint small pictures while he worked, about how every crate of eggs reminded him of patience and balance. When she asked about his past, he did not boast. Instead, he shared stories with humility. How he once played guitar for his daughter by candlelight. How he learned to find hope even in the darkest nights of war. Lena listened. For the first time in years, she listened not to reports, not to profit forecasts, but to stories that touched something deeper inside her. In Raphael's words, she found honesty. In his presence, she felt a calm she had forgotten existed. One evening, the sky turned heavy with rain. Lena's driver offered to take her home quickly, but she asked to stop by the market. There she saw Raphael covering his stall with torn plastic sheets, trying to shield the eggs from the downpour. Water dripped from his hair, but his focus stayed on protecting what little he had. Watching him, Lena felt a strange ache in her chest. When he finally noticed her, she whispered from her car window, "Raphael, why are you always so strong? Don't you ever feel like life is unfair?" Raphael paused, his hands resting on the plastic sheet. Then he looked at her wheelchair and finally into her eyes. "Life was never promised to be fair," he said gently. "But healing is more than what the body can or cannot do. Healing is believing that your life still holds meaning. When you choose to believe that, you are already walking, even if your legs don't move." Those words pierced through the walls Lena had built around herself. For years, bitterness had ruled her nights. For years, she had convinced herself that hope was useless. But Raphael's voice, steady and sincere, cracked the silence she carried. That night, for the first time in many years, Lena did not fall asleep with tears on her cheeks. Instead, she thought about his words. Healing is about the heart. Maybe, just maybe, she was not as broken as she believed. And so, the Iron CEO kept returning to the market, not just for eggs, but for moments of quiet strength. Each visit drew her deeper into Raphael's world, where kindness asked for nothing in return, and where the man with gentle hands began to change the rhythm of her life. As days passed, the bond between Lena and Raphael grew deeper. She returned to the market more often, sometimes with excuses about car routes, sometimes with none at all. The truth was simple. She felt at peace in his presence, in a world where everything was measured by contracts and numbers. Raphael and his daughter, Alma, gave her something different, moments that felt real. Alma adored Lena from the start. The little girl, only 8 years old, would run to her with drawings in her hands and stories spilling from her mouth. She would climb into Lena's lap, unafraid of the wheelchair, and ask questions no one else dared. "Auntie Lena, when you get better, will you race me in the park?" The innocence of her voice touched Lena in ways she could not explain. Those small interactions lit corners of her heart she thought had gone dark forever. Raphael watched quietly, seeing the change in Lena. Her smile came easier now. Her laughter, though soft, was genuine. She no longer seemed like the unreachable CEO in the tower, but like a woman rediscovering the rhythm of life. Then came the day that shifted everything. Raphael introduced her to a close friend, Dr. Miranda Solis, a veteran like him who had dedicated her life to medicine. Dr. Solis was known for pioneering a new treatment for spinal injuries, one that many doctors considered too experimental, but had shown surprising results. Raphael spoke carefully, his voice filled with both hope and honesty. "Lena, I know you've been told before that walking is impossible. I know the greatest doctors have said there is no chance. But Miranda's work is different. It is not easy. It will demand everything from you. But I believe you deserve this chance." Lena's heart pounded. She had spent years chasing every lead, every top surgeon, every cutting-edge therapy that money could buy. All of them had ended with the same words, "Never again." The thought of opening that wound once more terrified her. But as she looked at Raphael, she saw no doubt in his eyes, only faith. For the first time in years, she felt something she had buried long ago, hope. Fragile, trembling, but alive, she agreed to meet Dr. Solis, and soon after, the treatment began. It was not a miracle cure. It was brutal. The therapy pushed her body beyond its limits. The first sessions left her screaming in pain, her arms gripping the sides of the bed, sweat pouring down her face. Nights blurred into days as exhaustion swallowed her. Many times she wanted to give up, but she was not alone anymore. Raphael was always there, his hand steady in hers, whispering, "Don't fight alone. I'm right here." His presence was like an anchor, keeping her from sinking, and Alma, with her wide eyes and unshakable belief, brought small drawings to the hospital room. One picture showed Lena standing tall with the words, "Auntie Lena is a hero." Another showed the three of them walking together under a bright sun. Each sketch was a reminder that someone believed in her, even when she did not believe in herself. The therapy sessions became a test, not just of her body, but of her spirit. Every scream of pain brought memories of her accident, of everything she had lost. But every encouraging word from Raphael reminded her of what she could still gain. For years, Lena had thought her life was defined by what she could no longer do. Now, little by little, she began to understand that life could still be defined by what she chose to fight for. She started to notice progress. First, faint tingles in her legs, where once there had been nothing. Then, the ability to move a foot an inch across the bed. tiny steps. But to her, they were victories greater than any business triumph. One evening, as the sun set and painted the room in soft light, Lena whispered, "Raphael, what if this doesn't work? What if I'm only fooling myself?" Raphael leaned closer, his voice calm and unwavering. "Hope is never wasted, Lena. Even if you fall, the fight itself makes you stronger. And if you rise, even for one step, then the world changes." She held on to those words. They became her fuel. The woman once known as the Iron CEO was no longer just a figure of power and wealth. She was a fighter again, not for contracts or headlines, but for her own life, for her own chance to stand. And though the path ahead remained uncertain, one truth was clear. The spark of hope had been lit, and it would not go out. The months that followed were filled with endless struggle. Every morning began with therapy. Every night ended with exhaustion. Lena pushed her body through fire, through pain that made her scream until her voice broke. There were days she felt she could not continue, days when the weight of failure pressed hard against her chest. Yet, every time she reached that breaking point, Raphael was there. His hand in hers reminded her she was not fighting alone. He never let go, not during the hardest sessions, not during the darkest nights, and Alma, with her bright eyes and unwavering belief, filled the room with pictures and laughter. Her small voice would say, "Auntie Lena, you are my hero," and those words became the anchor that kept Lena from giving up. Little by little, changes began to show. At first, it was only a faint flicker of movement in her toes, then a small shift in her leg. The progress was slow, but it was real. Each sign was a light in the tunnel, proof that her fight was not in vain. The day came when Dr. Miranda Solis looked at her with a smile and said, "It is time." Lena's heart pounded as the therapist supported her to stand. Her legs trembled, her arms shook, and every nerve burned with pain. For a moment, she thought she would collapse, but then she remembered Raphael's words, "Healing is more than the body. It is believing your life still holds meaning." She took a breath, clenched her fists, and pushed upward. Her legs wavered, but they did not give way. Tears blurred her vision as she stood tall for the first time in 5 long years. The room went silent, as if the world itself was holding its breath. She looked into the mirror in front of her and saw not the CEO trapped in a chair, but a woman who had fought every battle and refused to surrender. With her body shaking, she took one step, then another. The sound of her foot touching the floor echoed like thunder in her soul. Raphael stepped forward, arms open, eyes filled with pride. She walked into his embrace, collapsing against him as sobs broke free. Alma cheered, clapping her small hands and shouting, "You did it, Auntie Lena, you did it." In that moment, Lena realized her empire was not the skyscraper she ruled, nor the millions who admired her. Her true empire was built in these simple yet powerful bonds. Kindness from a man with gentle hands, hope from a child's heart, and faith she thought she had lost forever. From that day, Lena's life shifted. She returned to her company, but not with the same armor of the Iron CEO. She no longer cared for titles or headlines. Instead, she spoke openly about her journey, about pain, about healing, and about the people who had carried her when she could not carry herself. She created a foundation to support research for spinal treatments, ensuring others could have the same chance she was given. But beyond that, she devoted time to being present for Alma, to sharing meals with Raphael, to walking through the markets where her story had begun. No longer did she whisper wishes of what she had lost. Instead, she spoke words of gratitude for what she had found. The woman who once believed her story ended in a wheelchair discovered that her story was only beginning. And so, Lena Vargas stood, not because of wealth, not because of power, but because of hope, resilience, and love that refused to let her fall. That was the day the silent empire transformed into a living legacy, one built not from steel and glass, but from courage and connection. And for the rest of her life, she carried the truth that sometimes the greatest victories are not won in boardrooms, but in the quiet strength of standing once more. And so, her journey reminds us that true strength is not measured by wealth or titles, but by the courage to rise again. Thank you for watching, and if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring real-life stories.